Now, the next figure is a major figure, and he is one that you really should know if you don't know him, and that is Henry Eyster Jacobs. Now, Jacobs is definitely one of the most significant figures, thinkers within Lutheranism in America, had an enormous impact in theology in the 19th century, and continued to do so throughout the 20th century. And he himself his life basically extends through this entire era that we're talking about, of this confessional revival within Lutheranism, especially in America. So he's born in 1844 and he dies in 1932. So he lives till almost 90 years old. So he had a very long and extremely productive life, and he lives throughout that era. Throughout that era, so he's from Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, and his family is largely missionary. So he ended up serving on as the president of the missionary board, the Board of Foreign Missions of the General Conference, which he was also a part of, as other figures that we've mentioned as well. So he graduated from Pennsylvania College and then the Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg, and he ends up being a professor at a couple different colleges, including the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. And he does many other things as well. So he himself is largely spends most of his career being a professor, but he's also involved in foreign missions, he has family members that are involved in foreign missions, and he did a lot of writing. And not just a lot of writing, but a lot of church work and a lot of facilitating other writings and a lot of translation work as well. So if you're going to look at kind of Jacobs, his own major work, okay, his most important work, if you're going to read anything from Jacobs, what should you read? The thing that you should read is a summary of the Christian faith, which is a systematic theology, and it's really catechetical in the way that it's put together. And if you've listened to this program for a while, you know that I've done programs with Pastor Polzin going through Henry Eyster Jacobs volumes. I know it's been a while since we've actually done a program, but we're going through this because we do put this out, jspublishing.org, if you're curious about getting stuff, as I already mentioned earlier. So if you do want to read something by Jacobs, this is the one I recommend. So it's catechetical in that everything he's got a topic, man is created, for example, and then he asks questions and gives answers. So how many states of man are there? And he says 5: the state of integrity, the state of corruption, the state of grace, the state of glory, the state of misery. In which of these was man created? So it goes basically just question and answer, which is an interesting and very really accessible way of doing theology. This is a very accessible systematic theology. If you're not too familiar with the Lutheran tradition and how systematic theology is done, this really is a very good entry point. And below a lot of these questions, he just, he has a brief answer, and then he gives scripture that defends what he's saying. So it's pretty simple in the way that it's put together, but actually like really, really theologically thorough as well. And he does include quotations from several theologians, including, Luther, Melanchthon, the Book of Concord, and some of the 17th century authors as well. So he actually has two systematic theologies, and he wanted to produce really the first one that was ever written in English, and the first one was this book called Elements of Religion. And Elements of Religion is definitely worthwhile as well, but it's a very short volume. So he wanted to produce a uniquely American-produced, in English, systematic theology from a Lutheran perspective. So he's got Elements of Religion, which is a small volume, and that is a good introduction as well, even maybe better because it's shorter, as an introduction to what Lutheran theology is all about, if you want to look into it in more detail. So Jacobs produces that work, and then later produces a summary of the Christian faith, which is his more in-depth, because he lived long enough to really write a basic systematics and then one that was a lot more in-depth. So those are Jacobs' own major writings, but he also was involved in so many other things. One of those is he produced the first series of volumes in English of Martin Luther's writings. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody had produced volumes of Luther's writings beforehand. There's a Galatians commentary that's very old. John Bunyan read this, so this is a long time ago. You have various works of Luther that were published in English by Puritans, which means they're kind of picking and choosing which Luther they like, because you don't really have a lot of the more sacramental treatises being published. It's not like a bunch of Calvinists are going to go and make sure to spend time translating, Luther's rebuttals to Zwingli on the Lord's Supper. So it is limited in terms of what's there in English. So there's some stuff around. But Jacobs is the first one to make a whole set of volumes. It's called The Works of Martin Luther. I'm looking at them on my bookshelf right now. I actually got a copy of those at a half-price bookstore when I was in college. And the only Luther I'd read before that was the Galatians commentary, which I loved. And I got, what is it, 6 volumes. I think I read those in 2 weeks because I was so in love with, with what I was reading. I mean, it just captivated me in so many ways. So excellent volumes of Luther's works that you can still, I think you could find them on Google Books. They're still, they're still good translations. I know there are more modern translations, of course. So one of the things that he did was introduce the writings of Martin Luther to an English-speaking audience. And that was really what he was trying to do, was establish English Lutheran works, a uniquely American, and not American Lutheranism in the Schmucker sense, but American Lutheranism is a confessionalism that existed in America, that spoke the language of the people, that spoke to the unique problems that were going on in the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries. So along with that, he did a bunch of other things. So one of those is that he translated Schmid's volume, Heinrich Schmid's The Doctrinal Theology of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Is that right? Or am I confusing that with something else? But Schmid's volume, I don't know why I'm getting confused, but Heinrich Schmid, if you look that up on Amazon, you can find that volume. And I just mentioned this earlier, which is when I was talking about Widener, which is this idea, or this book that just takes quotes from various scholastic theologians of the 17th century. And so Jacobs put that together as a way to just get out there what was Lutheran theology. So why not get, this compendium and use that compendium of theology in English to introduce people to the theological development that occurred during that particular era. So that was a major project of Jacobs. Jacobs wrote actually a number of hymns. There is at least one included in the Lutheran Service book. He has a hymn on the Lord's Supper. So if you look at the index, you could find like the author index in the Lutheran Service book of hymn writers, and he's in there. So he was a hymn writer as well. He worked on liturgies in the Lutheran Church in America. Another major project that he was involved in, alongside of his systematic theologies, alongside of his getting Luther's works published, alongside of his taking other important Lutheran works and making sure they got published in English, he had another major project, which was the Lutheran Commentary series. And this is the first set of commentaries from a Lutheran perspective written in English for an American audience. So what Jacobs did was he found figures who were important confessional Lutheran thinkers, and this was outside of his own, not just in his own church body, but he was looking for people across Lutheranism in the United States that were confessional. So he's not grabbing onto the more, Samuel Schmucker type American Lutherans. And he divides it up so that each of them takes 1 or 2 books in the New Testament, and then commentaries are published going through that. And he writes himself. He's got an intro in those volumes. And then Widener, I mentioned, he wrote commentaries. They were in that same series. So he put together these commentaries. He was the editor, so he found figures, assigned them to books, and helped facilitate their publication, which ended up being a complete set of commentaries from a Lutheran perspective written in English. So that's a huge accomplishment. So Jacobs, even if you don't know who he is, which a lot of people don't, he had a huge impact upon Lutheranism in America. He is the first, really not the first, because you have the Henkels, for example, who are very confessional and getting some things into English. But he is the first who's really successful in massively having these great projects of translation and providing resources that are in English. So you do have isolated people before Jacobs, definitely, that are important, but kind of nobody takes it to the scale that Jacobs does. So he's someone who I think if you're a Lutheran, you really owe a lot of gratitude for doing that and bringing those works into English. So we should definitely know who he is.